Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Dr. Chuck Huss is an emergency room physician at Mercy Hospital in Iowa City and longtime medical director of the Johnson County Ambulance Service. A graduate of the University of Iowa Medical School, Dr. Huss did an externship in rural Alaska and a residency at Iowa in family practice. After residency, he worked for the University of Maine, doing a cooperative program of half-time medicine and half-time exercise physiology. Leaving Maine, Huss spent 13 months at the Antarctica as the station physician at the geographic South Pole. A major part of Dr. Huss's story is his love of marathon running, ice climbing, and mountain climbing. He's done the ultra marathons, the Pikes Peak Run 5 times, the Grand Canyon Rim to Rim twice, and several 50-milers. As a runner, he's averaged more than 3,000 running miles each year for the past 20 years. After taking mountain climbing courses from the Iowa Mountaineers and a snow climbing course on Mount Rainier, mountain climbing became his passion. He has climbed peaks and summits in Colorado, Alaska, Washington, Mexico, China, Africa, South America, Southern Alps, and Mount Everest. He's been part of 2 Everest expeditions. Just recently, Chuck agreed to be one of the honorary co-chairmen of the Iowa City Public Library Endowment and Capital Campaign. He's married and has 1 stepson. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Your story, I know, begins in Boone, Iowa in 1949, where you were born. I'd like to know a little bit about your parents and siblings.
Well, I was born in central Iowa, as you know. My father started a farm machinery business in the early 50s and moved to Perry along with a family of 3 small children and my mother. I have an older brother who's 4 years older than I am and a younger sister that's 2 years younger. And we all grew up in a pretty modest environment in central Iowa, and where education was a priority and hard work was expected.
Mm-hmm. And did you start in sports early?
I always liked sports. Anything that involved activity was what I enjoyed. You know, Little League baseball and those sorts of things.
When did you decide that endurance sports was going to be your path?
Well, you know, that's kind of interesting. I sort of discovered that before it ever really became cognitive clear to me. I just did things that lasted all day. But no one ever really pointed out that those were things that I would be particularly good at, and I sort of figured it out on my own. It was, I think coaches weren't quite as savvy in those days as they are in Iowa City now, because if you showed any talent, you'd be invited out for a number of sports in Iowa City. But
you did it on your own.
I sort of figured it out on my own.
No, you graduated from Perry High School,
right?
And then you were off to UNI, and you were in chemistry and pre-med, and then you went to Iowa and graduated in medical school at Iowa.
Right.
But you stopped out a few times. What happened?
In medical school, there were no big gaps in my education, really. But during medical school, I did take an externship, a sort of an elective community medicine rotation that just happened to be in Alaska. And I found it to my liking, both from a medical point of view and that I was getting to do a lot of interesting stuff, seeing a lot of things that I found fascinating in a very interesting geographic place for me as well. And because it was seemed to be mutually beneficial for what I was after as well as the people I was working with, they asked me to stay for a year if I wanted to, and I jumped at the chance to do that and stayed on the externship for what turned out to be 16 months instead of 2 months, and stayed in Alaska.
Is that where you fell in love with snow?
I liked snow a lot before then,
You
actually,
did.
but I got a chance to see sort of the wonders of Alaska, which included real mountains, which I'd had only a brief encounter with before, and found out that I really needed to get some training before I got myself hurt if I was going to play in the mountains like I enjoy so much and now.
Well, after you finished, you were you went down to the Antarctica for quite a few months. This was after your family practice?
Right. I came back to Iowa City and finished the last few months of medical school and then did a residency in family medicine here at the university. And immediately after that, I went to Maine for a year, and then the opportunity arose somewhat based on my experiences with cold weather assignments and sports to go to Antarctica and spend a year as the station physician at the South Pole.
What was that like for you?
It wasn't particularly challenging from a medical point of view because in the summer there was probably only 100 people there, all of whom were healthy adults for the most part, but there were certainly trauma things, as you'd expect, but there weren't many illnesses. But there were challenges. I was expected to be the dentist during the year, and so they sent me to dental school for 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
And so I learned drilling and filling in 2 weeks.
Oh.
And that was actually the most challenging thing. The reason that they have a physician down there is that you're isolated for 9 months of the year without any chance of transportation in or out of there. So I was down there to be the physician and dentist.
I hope the patients didn't know that you'd only had 2 weeks training.
Oh, they knew.
Well, what
they
brought
could
you?
tell.
They could tell. Oh, how did you get back to Iowa City?
Actually, at the end of my assignment in Antarctica, I had a telegram that said, asking me if I might be interested in taking a short-term assignment in the emergency department at Mercy Hospital. Well, that short-term assignment now is going on 19 years.
And that being an emergency room physician has allowed you time to train, and you got into running in the 70s, is that correct?
When I was a resident, I started running on a very regular basis. I was always interested in endurance sports, tried to do something most every day as far as exercise goes, but it became much more focused sort of thing for daily endurance things in the late 70s, right? So, particularly with running.
You called yourself, I read in the research, kind of a workout nut, because you've been working out now for every day almost for the past 25 years. Yeah. What's your typical workout? Do you have a typical workout session?
Fairly typical. I don't consider myself a workout nut, but that's what I've been called.
Oh,
okay. By my relatives.
Oh, okay.
I just consider that some sort of exercise part of my lifestyle, and I don't think it's fanatical at all. But I feel better if I exercise every day, and it allows me to eat pretty much what I like. And my typical workouts involve about an hour of some sort of aerobic activity, generally running, because It's always available. It can be done with or without a partner, with minimal gear, and any time, any weather. I work out at least once a week with friends, usually a long run on Sundays. In an hour, I can, it used to be I could run almost 11 miles in an hour. Now it's more like 8 miles in an hour. Then I do some upper body things, anywhere from 30 to 50 pull-ups a day. Usually do a little bit of walking on my hands, which is good for upper body strength and balance, which are helpful in climbing. Some sit-ups, which I think are important, and a few other upper body things.
What do your neighbors think if they see you walking on your hands up your driveway?
Well, the first few months that we lived in that neighborhood, they thought it was a little peculiar, but they just
they just
say that's the crazy neighbor.
I'd like to talk about how did you, living in Iowa, get this passion for climbing? Where did this start? And when did it?
Yeah, it may have started with scouting in my youth. I learned to camp out. Sort of, Scoutmaster made it imperative that you learn how to take care of yourself, although they were usually around, but it soon led to camping on my own with my close friends. And I always liked aerobic sports, and a chance opportunity to go to Colorado in the early 70s with an old high school friend led to camping at the bottom of a mountain, and one day saying, you know, we ought to climb this, and we did. It was his first real mountain too, and it started a lifelong love affair with mountains.
And you took some rock climbing with the Iowa Mountaineers in Wisconsin.
Right. The Eberts had a really good club and a good training program, and I took a week-long course in rock climbing there, and then went to glaciated peaks out west to learn snow climbing, which has become my real passion.
What is the difference between snow climbing and just mountain climbing?
Well, snow climbing involves colder weather, climbing actually on snow using a little bit different equipment, crampons and ice axes, and it has a few added objective risks of avalanches and crevasses and the like that make it more than just a athletic event, but it's an event for somebody who's being aware of their environment and thinking how to keep things safe as well as an athletic event.
You are in tune when you climb all the time with what's happening in the environment, the nature.
Well, you
the
should
elements.
be because it's dangerous what we do, and you really need to be aware of your environment, what the conditions are, and certainly be willing to turn around if danger is too high.
You have to harness, I would think you would have to harness one's ego that you're not going to get to the top this time because of the weather. And you turn
absolutely. You need to go out for the experience. The summit is truly optional, and safety and friendship are really your first objectives when you're out there.
If you take, everybody knows that people who climb mountains and rock climb are physically fit. What are some other really important characteristics of a good snow climber or mountain climber? What do you consider? And being aware of nature, like you said.
Well, I think you need to have a good sense of what's going on around you, and be calm, and be willing to turn around if need be and come back another day.
Let's talk about some of your climbs. Do you have some favorites that you could share, some of the experiences of where you've gone and whom you've gone with?
That's sort of a whirlwind. In had some great experiences in my life and met some really great people that most of whom I still climb with. But the buddy that I spent a year at the South Pole with, who on the way home we climbed Mount Cook, that is this just spectacular 1.5 mile long knife edge peak in New Zealand on Thanksgiving Day, 1981. I'll never forget that climb. It's just so spectacular. It looks unclimbable.
Was it just the two of you?
It was actually my friend from Antarctica and 2 friends that we'd met in New Zealand beforehand. That's a really memorable one. Just big glaciers. You can see the Tasman Sea, the ocean, not so far away, and just this spectacular steep knife edge peak.
You brought a picture from Russia.
Right. Been to Russia 4 times. The first time was in 1985 when it was still immersed in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and we weren't particularly well received by most of the locals. The climbers were quite anxious to talk with us about what our lives were like and the like, but the average Soviets were pretty frightened about us. That was quite an experience, and
why were they
really
frightened of you?
Because we were the evil Americans.
And where else? You brought a picture of the Wind River in Wyoming.
Yeah, there have been any number of great climbs. I try to get out as often as time and conditions will allow, but summer and winter. But I've had the great pleasure of climbing probably more than 300 peaks around the world, and it's been really fun. 28 international expeditions.
You've been in trouble very few times, and that I read in the research it was in Mexico. Tell us about
that was sort of early in my career, and 3 of us were roped together climbing on some pretty steep ice, and one climber fell, and we were all roped together. And because of the icy surface, this is really hard water ice type stuff, not crunchy, snowy ice. We fell probably 100 meters down and got pretty banged up. And one fellow broke his leg right above his boot top, and the fracture was poking out through the skin. And I had a few more minor fractures, but we had no good means of rescue for a while, and so we started pulling the guy with the broken leg down the mountain, self-rescue. Ultimately, we were able to get some local help, but it did not involve a helicopter or an ambulance until about 36 hours after the injury, and about a 10-mile self-rescue.
You were pulling him on what?
I was sliding him down the ice for a
Just
while,
sliding
and then carrying
with
him.
his on his jacket. You didn't have anything under him.
No.
So what happened to him?
We ultimately got to the trailhead a day and a half after the accident, and then we went into Mexico City and found the emergency care somewhat substandard, and after about 12 hours of monkeying around, flew him back to America.
And what happened to him?
Well, he had a rough course. He immediately went to surgery when he got back to Denver, and because of the difficulties of, complications of delayed treatment, had a long course in the hospital, developed pulmonary embolus, complication of inactivity, and and all that. And but he's back climbing.
Is he back climbing?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's sort of the spirit of these folks. You know, they don't stop something they love just because of a broken leg.
So, how many of these people, the same people, do you climb with? Is there a group?
For the most part, I climb with a circle of about 10 friends that I've met over the years, and just sort of recurring sorts of things that you say, yeah, you know, I've been thinking about this. What do you think? Would you be interested in going? Some of the bigger things require widening that circle of friends a bit. But because of safety concerns, friendship concerns, all that, you often go with the same people, the same risk tolerance, same friendships, people you want to spend a month in a tent with, and the people that you know, have about the same risk tolerance that say, yeah, time to turn around. And I've been on several mountains with some of these guys, and you know, we'll just look at each other and say, you know, you don't even need to say it. You know,
They know.
they
You know.
say, you know, it's time for us to go home, or you know, go down. It's unsafe, and it's sort of uncanny. The sort of telepathic, same wavelength that you share with these people.
I think you would develop such a trust in these other climbers that you trust them and their good judgment.
They're my brothers.
They're your brothers.
Or in a couple of cases, sisters. But but yeah, you definitely have this sense of what's right and wrong, and the desire and to reach certain goals, but the willingness to turn around, and sort of same sense of when it's time to do that.
Let's talk about Everest. I read that you wrote that, and I quote, Everest isn't the most technically challenging mountain or even the coldest, but it's special. Climbing it becomes a compulsion. Why is that so? Why is Everest so special?
Well, it's special because it's the highest peak around, and everybody who has ever considered themselves a mountaineer would like to have had a chance to climb it, would like to have summited there. And technically, it's not as difficult as some peaks, and it's not the coldest, although it's cold enough to get frostbite. But the Arctic peaks, Antarctica, even Denali in Alaska is really a colder peak. But it's got this special draw that if you've climbed it, you know, there's a special feeling about having done that one.
And you were on the last. You were there 2 years in a row.
I was there in the spring of 1998 and the spring of 2000, this past spring, so 2 years apart.
And will you go back?
Well, I will go back. Whether I'll go back to climb or not is up in the air right now.
Why is that?
Well, the cost, the danger, and the time, and the vacation time. It's a quite expensive peak to climb, and whether it could, you know, you don't like to have somebody else pay for your vacation.
Sure.
But this is far more expensive than a person really wants to do out of pocket. And you can't interest people in it from an interest point of view because of sort of the notoriety of Everest in its own right, and filming and those sorts of things. And I'm also getting sort of at the far edge of the bell-shaped curve of age of people who summit Everest at this point. Although
what is the age limit? Is there?
Well, the oldest person who's ever climbed it is 60 years, 161 days. And there's actually quite a notoriety involved with being the oldest guy. There's contests, and a number of people this past year were trying to become the oldest guy, both of whom failed this spring. But you know, early 50s is a little old for somebody climbing Everest, although I think I could do it. And I really thought I had a good chance this spring, but got an infectious disease at the high camp and just couldn't go any further.
Couldn't go any turn back. You said also, in what I read, that you said that Everest has a dark side. What did you mean by that?
There's lots of big egos at Everest Base Camp. A sort of a loss of what is normally a great, helpful, friendly fraternity of people in mountaineering who would help one another. And don't consider it a contest of getting to the summit. It's only a contest with yourself, whether you're good enough or strong enough or smart enough to get to the top. But Everest seems to be something where a lot of that fraternal look is lost for one reason or another, and it involves money. Lots of money involved there, and a cutthroat attitude on getting to the top. And that's sort of the dark side of Everest that I really don't like. It's crowded there, and most mountaineers kind of like places that are wilder and less populated. There's a lot of people at Everest Base Camp. Nonetheless, it's still a compelling goal.
Now, you're married to Pam, who is your running buddy, I read, and have you ever been able to interest her in climbing?
Oh, she's tagged along on quite a few climbs, mostly domestic ones here in the States. She's climbed quite a few of the Colorado 14ers and is a good rock climber. She likes to cross-country ski as well. She's done several international trips with me as well. Climbed Kilimanjaro, walked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, climbed the highest peak in Venezuela as well. So she's a good little athlete and a good buddy too.
That's great. I always ask this of my guests. I'm going to ask you, looking back in your 51 years, what person or what event has had a major influence on you?
Well, my parents, of course, directed me in the right direction, but you know, I think when you're growing up, you don't recognize what a good job they're doing or that they're bringing you up well. One person who comes to mind early on is a guy who was my scoutmaster and also ended up being an employer for me for my early years. A guy named Bob Stokely back in Perry, Iowa. He challenged me. He just said, all right, you want to go camping? You organize all this stuff, and just made us responsible to get the food together and do all the logistics. And I'm still doing that today, putting trips together.
For your family or
for myself,
friends?
and now I do it even for other people who are interested in going on some trips to exotic places that don't have the wherewithal or the time to do it.
So where are you thinking about going next?
My next big trip is to take 14 people to Everest Base Camp in the spring back to Nepal. So I'm going back to Everest.
You are going back to Everest.
Just not going to climb on Everest itself this coming April. But I do hope to escape for a couple of days and climb a 20,000-foot peak in the neighborhood.
Alone?
Probably with a Sherpa, local guy. But do it, just two of us, fast.
Fast. Our poet laureate, Stanley Kunitz, asks in a poem, what makes the engine go? What makes you go? What makes you want to do this? Where does it come from?
Oh, I don't know. I sort of always wanted to grow up. I always wanted to achieve things, and I'm not very good at looking back, but I'm really good at looking forward, I think, and planning adventures for myself and others. Once you've done one adventure, you could say, "Oh, I'm really glad I did that," and you dwell on it only briefly, and are always planning to see if you can do something else. And now I'm trying to pack as many things in before I before I'm too old to do it or before I die. And so now I'm really busy trying to, I think a reasonably well-educated, active mind can think of lots more things that you'd like to do than you ever have time to achieve. And I guess I'm guilty of that in a large way.
So you are a full-time physician, you are a full-time climber and runner, and you agreed to be the honorary co-chair of the Iowa City Public Library Capital and Endowment Campaign. How did you decide to do this, or why?
Well, there's obviously plenty of things to do in my waking day, but I really consider the Iowa City Library and libraries in general a really important part of a person's upbringing and a part of their community. You can, I grew up going to a small Carnegie library in my hometown and have fond memories of checking out books about adventure and particularly Lewis and Clark and other adventure books that really sort of got me started in daydreaming about the possibility of maybe doing that sort of stuff someday. And so it's a special pursuit that I think is really important and that is certainly worthy of my time and I hope worthy of other people's time and support. So Iowa City has a great library and I think we should try to keep it good and make it better if at all possible.
My last question, I'd love to look at your library. What kind of books? I would imagine they're adventure books. Are they?
Yeah, that's becoming a bit of a hobby now,
of
collecting books. It first started out just reading adventure books. Now I purchase just about every good mountaineering book around and have begun collecting antiquarian mountaineering books, some 100 years old or more. And so I have probably the best mountaineering library in Iowa City, maybe in Iowa. I have at least as many mountaineering books as the university library does, which is pretty good.
Are you interested all in adventure stories like exploring since you were at the South Pole, exploring the South Pole like Amundsen and Scott?
Yeah, I've got a fair number of Arctic and Antarctic exploration books as well, and certainly being at the South Pole, it perked my interest in Antarctic adventure, and those were, it's called the much like mountaineering is skills are a lot the same: survival, dealing with cold weather, dealing with snow and ice. So it's got a pretty special part for me too.
Well, I wish you well on your next adventure, and I'm sure we will read about you in the newspaper. And thank you so much for being a guest on One of a Kind, Chuck.
Well, thank you for your interest. It's a pleasure.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Dr. Chuck Huss. At 51 years of age, Chuck is incredibly fit. To be able to endure high altitudes, extreme cold and discomfort, unpredictable circumstances, the unknown, profound demands on one's body and mind is a remarkable achievement. Reaching a summit is optional, according to Chuck, and I quote, "High-altitude mountaineering is really a personal challenge. You're not out there to conquer the mountain. You're there to conquer yourself," end quote. Physician, mountain climber, snow and ice climber, marathoner, and husband, Chuck Huss is one of a kind.